I love the green thumbs up card, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to everyone watching. This is our June seminar with David Burkus, who is a personal favorite. I was so happy, David, when you said you would do this. You know, we chatted on the podcast, which has gotten, like, people say it's, you know, one of their favorite Happy Melly podcasts. Yours too, Lisa. Well, actually, and Christians. You've all been on the podcast. But really, super happy to have you. And yeah, I mean, what we've been doing is, you know, maybe you chatting for a bit, perhaps just about your new book, some key messages, and then opening it up for people to just ask questions and have sort of a really relaxed discussion.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so we're starting inadvertently a bit late for because of my fault. So maybe we'll top line those ideas, because again, a lot of them are in that podcast, and then we'll get into that discussion more. But the crux of the message of the new book on new management, we're calling it a new book now. It's been out like a year, and I'm working on a super secret project. So when I say new book, most of the time in my mind, I'm thinking about a different project. But the crux of it is that, I mean, as anybody who's connected to the Happy Melly community knows, the way that we're doing work has changed a lot. And really, that is actually the second change. The first change was the type of work we're doing. So around a little more than 100 years ago, we really started what would be that sort of first round of management thinkers. So this was the Frederick Taylors of the world, the people that were looking to, how do we manage a factory, right? How do we repeated tasks in an assembly line format? How do we manage that to speed up production, make it more efficient, et cetera? But that, and their ideas worked, don't get me wrong, but their ideas were very much based on the idea of you train them to do the job, you incentivize them to do the job, you hold them accountable to a certain standard of performance, and if they don't meet that, you get rid of them. That's Management 101, right? That's like, if you've ever read Kenneth Blanchard's 1 Minute Manager, it's a great book, but it's based off the idea that people know what they need to do, and they're doing it often, and we're doing it repetitively, so you just need to give them feedback, hold them accountable, et cetera. And that worked great, and that got us to about the 1950s, 1960s in Europe and in North America, where we started to have this shift of work. And Peter Drucker coined the term knowledge work as a different term from industrial work. And really, where knowledge work has gotten now, fast forward another half a century, is we're really in creative work. Almost everybody who works in an office now doesn't do a repetitive task all of the time. Their job is to solve problems, which is a fundamentally creative act. It takes a different skill set, a different process, a bunch of different things. And what I try and point out in energy management is that the rules of management change because you're managing a different type of work. And we've seen that the way we do work, geographically dispersed, usually in different types of offices, using any mix of full-time, part-time, contractor, employees, consultants, et cetera, all of that has sort of changed. But yet a lot of people are still relying on old school Frederick Taylor ideas. So we look at, in energy management, we look at what a bunch of different companies are doing now that is different from business as usual. And that runs the gamut from how do they communicate and interact via email, and really actually hopefully not via some better tools, to what does pay look like in this new world of work, hopefully far more transparent, to what does time off and work-life balance look like with companies that are now offering sabbaticals to just about anybody, or unlimited vacation, what's that about, et cetera. And probably one of the biggest shifts is the role of managers. It used to be that managers were on top of leading a team. They knew every single task that needed to be done and the objectives, et cetera. And because that role of managers the role of management has changed, the role of managers now is much more alongside another member of the team who's helping to provide resources. And in some cases, it's flipped entirely. In fact, there's a chapter called Putting Customers Second, which is really, it's kind of a ploy to get people to pay attention, because what it's really about is whoever's interacting with the customer, they're the priority in the organization. And so you flip the org chart, as it were, so that managers really see themselves as serving that front line that's interacting with the customer, so that they can put the customer first. So customer still gets put first. They just get put first by a different category of people. And again, all of these ideas are meant to cope with what is the way that work the nature of work has changed, and what rules of management that were written in the Frederick Taylor factory age need to be rewritten. In fact, one of the working titles for the book was Throw Out the Rule Book, because that was the whole idea, right? It was just, we need to throw out the rule book and write a different one. And my hope was to profile companies that were doing things differently. I should have profiled Happy Melly as an organization too, but I was a little slow on the uptake in learning about all the different things that they're doing. So there you go.
That's going to be for your secret project next. Include us.
Maybe, or it might have to be the secret next project, but we'll get it there eventually. We definitely will.
No, do you want to keep?
So, I mean, that's really my top line on kind of what the book is about. Sam, I know that you've dug into it. If there are specific chapters that you want me to dive into, I'm happy to do that. Or if other people are just kind of interested in where we go from here. Again, it's kind of weird because I don't know how many people have heard the episode, haven't, et cetera. And I don't want to just rephrase. I want to dive into what are the implications of this, et cetera.
I have to admit that I didn't prepare. Normally I would have, but I'm on a couple of deadlines and it didn't quite work out. So.
That's fine. No, so we just submitted the manuscript for the next book. That deadline was June 1st. So I totally empathize. In fact, one of the reasons this is happening so late in June was that I was under that exact deadline of like, hey, that sounds great, but can we kick it down the road a bit? I got to meet this. So I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm completely blank, really. I know Sam dug into it, but I, for one, am completely blank. But I'm very interested in leadership and what you have to say about it. And mostly, one of my main interests would be how to get these companies that are still stuck in the 1900s or maybe even the 1800s, even for software developers and software developing companies that are still stuck in these old management practices. How do you tackle them to get out of it?
Yeah, so really there are two routes we can go depending on how much power you have in the organization, right? And so that's what I anticipated. So really the thing that a lot of people read the book and read a bunch of different practices, everything from salary transparency to firing the managers to unlimited vacation, right? And creating alumni networks and all of these different ideas. And the question that they often ask is similar here, is how do we get companies to adopt this? The truth though is that every company is different. And so nobody's going to be able to take this idea from Buffer, for example, and implant it in their company, because it's like organ donation, right? Sometimes it doesn't, the transplant doesn't work. But really one of the things I realized after the book came out, I wish I would have realized it before because it would have been a way better way to conclude the book, is that a lot of these practices are practices of elimination, right? In other words, they're practices of like, what you would love is for your company to start working like all of these other ones. But I bet if I really sort of drill down, what you would actually love is there's one or two things that drive you nuts. And if we could eliminate those, it would free you to sort of make that work. Mm-hmm. And so calling attention to that is really the better strategy. Not in just a venting, I'm frustrated way, but in sort of demonstrating, okay, I'm doing my work, I'm meeting my deadlines, I'm doing good work, and asking for, if on your own individual level, asking for a reprieve from that. Because I'm doing all of this, can we hold me accountable to this, but ease up on all of this thing? Sometimes it's reports, sometimes it's tracking vacation or expenses, whatever it is, asking to ease up on that. That's at the individual level. At that sort of frontline manager level, that's where people start to become sort of a human shield, right? And they go, okay, well, in my department, we're eliminating this and we're going to do it a little bit differently. And the hope is that creates this sort of pocket of excellence that everybody sees, and it has that route. So that's sort of like if you're powerless to change at the individual or the frontline manager level. Any higher up in that, then what you usually have is the ability to force the issue by way of some kind of survey, some kind of study of what are the things that are driving us nuts. But the number one piece of advice I give, even to CEOs now, is figure out what's driving your people nuts, what's preventing them from doing their best work, and eliminate that. whatever practice that or policy or new way of managing that shows up as, I'm fine with, because I've set some people free to do their best work.
What's the resistance from leadership into, I mean, I find it difficult. Like, leaders know that they need to move in this new way. They know that they need to change, but there's resistance, and I don't understand where the resistance comes from.
Well, so I would argue that a lot of them don't, right? So the number one refrain that I get pushback with is they'll say something like, what we're doing now is working, right? Which is, you're right there.
It isn't.
I know. I'm aware. I know. So there's an awareness of what other companies are doing, but what they're saying is like, what we're doing now is working. We're okay with the results that it's getting. And this is actually, I don't cover until the conclusion of the book, where I pull in the analogy of the internal combustion engine, which is, I'm going to get super nerdy here for a second. I apologize. If you look at physics, the internal combustion engine by design is only 30% efficient, meaning 30% of the energy in gasoline gets translated into forward motion. That's not fuel efficiency. There's nothing we can do to make it higher than that because of the laws of thermodynamics. So your only option, if you want to have a more efficient translation of energy into forward motion, is to build a different type of engine. And this is what, battery-powered automobile engines they're trying to do. This is rockets do for all sorts of stuff. So I'm willing to concede that they don't have to change because what they're doing now is working if they're satisfied with however much of their employees' energy is getting translated to value into the company, right? And we use employee engagement rates for that in a lot of places. There's Gallup survey, there's a bunch of other surveys, but you could use job satisfaction, job engagement. There's a bunch of different surveys you could use. If you're happy with the results, then to be honest with you, I don't have an argument. However, I don't know very many companies that are happy with the results. So that always tells me there's sort of room to grow and room to experiment. So that's kind of thing one. I would argue that a lot of people don't feel that sort of burning platform to change because they're looking at 30% or 18% engagement across the world, 30% in most of the developed world, United States, Canada, most of Europe, right? It's a little bit higher than that in terms of employee engagement. That's still not even 50%, right? So most people know there's that kind of room to grow. The second pushback you get is you'll get a fear of sort of making that change. This is the resistance piece that I think you were getting at. And this is where I try and say shrink the change as much as possible to make it temporary, to make it experimental, to whatever you can do. This is why I like the idea of policies of elimination, because policies of elimination can always be brought back, right? We're going to try for the next year, we're going to experiment with being geographically dispersed. Or we're going to experiment with using Slack instead of email. Or we're going to experiment with not doing a performance review this year and actually doing, every 2 months having an informal conversation with your manager. You can roll it out as that. There's so much freedom in the word beta. Software in particular knows this. For products, what we don't do is do that for people as well. And knowing that it's experimental and then we're going to reevaluate it, I think frees up a lot of people's fear of that change because it's not seen as permanent. So those are sort of the two biggest ones. That's not to say they're all encompassing because every manager brings to the table their own set of neuroses. And so beyond those are two different patterns, but beyond that, it's really on an individual level.
I love the combustion engine analogy.
Yeah, I didn't pay a lot of attention in my undergraduate physics class, but I remembered that. And thankfully, I at least had enough rapport with the person that taught that physics class to circle back with them 15 years later and go, I think this is true. Where is the? And literally he sent me a photocopy of the page in the textbook. Where
No, but it is entirely true because the pushback, even in just bouncing ideas around with co-workers, even not necessarily the management and the managers. We're doing fine, aren't we? We're delivering, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and we're happy. And I'm thinking, you don't even know what's possible.
Right.
This analogy is exactly, you're missing the 70% because you think that the universe is limited to the 30%.
Right. And listen, there's a lot of organizations where 30% is okay, McDonald's, right? Or any sort of fast food chain where there's repetitive tasks, et cetera. You don't really need to engage their full capacity. You just need them to repeat a set of tasks. So for the longest time, that was okay. But if your people's job is to solve problems, to squash bugs, to fix glitches in code, et cetera, then you need a higher level of engagement, and you're not tapping into it. You don't know what's possible if you could.
I wanted to ask something a bit different, David, but I know that you talked about, you mentioned it's important to know how much your colleagues are getting paid, right? That should be transparent. And I guess I'm just wondering, what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so this is the one everyone wants to talk about. And Sam, I remember you wanting to talk about it on the podcast too, so I should have known. And this is the one, I gave a TEDx talk that I guess it gets upgraded to a TED Talk. I'm not sure how that works, but it showed up on the front page. And this is the one everybody comes to me as. And it's weird because when I started researching the book, this was the one I agreed with the least, right? I was like, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't really like the idea of broadcasting what I get paid, et cetera. Like, I get it. It's private information, or you feel like it's private information. The big refrain from employers is that if everybody knew what everybody got paid, all hell would break loose, right? There'd be arguments, there'd be infighting, there'd be jealousy. And all of that is true if the system you're using to pay people is unfair and discriminatory and all of that, right? If it's not, though, the research actually suggests the opposite, right? So people want to know that how they're being paid is determined fairly, that they're not being discriminated against. Surprise, surprise. People want to know they're not being discriminated against. They also want to know what they need to do to make more money, right? And when all of those things are set and they're universal across the organization, most people, not everybody, you might have to invite 2% of your employees to be successful somewhere else because they can't handle this. But most people act like big boys and girls and can understand that a job that requires more responsibility or more skills or more experience pays more than a job that requires less. So the disparity in pay is not the issue. It's only an issue when people can't see that straight line between inputs and outputs, that straight line between experiences and qualifications and increases in pay, right? And the research suggests that in a secrecy condition, we're more likely to distort those things. So in a secrecy condition, we're always looking at what our coworkers, our peers, et cetera, are what we feel like they're putting in and what we feel like they're getting paid. And in a secrecy condition, we don't actually know either of those things. We don't know what their performance rating was last year or what it currently is, or et cetera. We're making an educated guess on that. And we don't know what they're getting paid because we're not allowed to talk about it. We're making an educated guess on that. So it's actually much more likely that we're going to get the wrong estimate of those two things and actually increase our dissatisfaction because we don't know. So making pay transparent actually alleviates one of those issues. In fact, some companies actually make both transparent. It's a little hard to do and it varies by country, and et cetera. So I don't want to get into that on the performance side. But most of them make that pay system, or at least the pay scale, transparent so that you can say, this is why she gets paid that much. And if you want to get paid that much, you need to do these things or be in this role, et cetera. And what's great about that is that actually decreases a lot of that frustration and infighting because we can point to a system that is fair and we can trust that system. And then if we feel like that system's not fair, we have recourse because we can bring it up. So in a lot of the companies that I interviewed, there was always a story of a situation where someone was being brought into the firm and they had less experience, but they were actually getting paid more than this person who was currently in the firm. They felt like that's not fair. But now that person has recourse. They can bring that up and get the raise they deserve or get the other thing changed. We can actually have this conversation. So that's the biggest thing, is even when you make that switch, you might have 6 months or so of people adjusting and feeling like, well, why does this person get this, et cetera? But it's an invitation into a conversation that can eventually arrive at that system. And I'll give you a great example of this. So Buffer is a company I admire a lot. This is probably my second reference to them already in 20 minutes. So there you go. I profiled them in the book, and shortly after the book came out, there was this, like, I call it a hit piece, right? Because it was an article that tried to spin Buffer in a negative light. And the article literally went like this. It said, Buffer has pay transparency, still has a gender wage gap, right? That was their headline. That was what they're trying to argue. But then you read into the interview and you see them interviewing the CEO and the PR person, and they're saying, well, yeah, because we have transparency, we found out that there was a discrepancy. Essentially, it boiled down to if we make the experience categories 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years, etc., men are more likely to claim a higher category of experience than women are. Men upgrade the amount of years of experience, women decrease it, at least in buffer. And that was creating this disparity. And they found out about it because they had transparency and people brought it up, and then they fixed it. So the real end of the story is the headline should actually read like, Buffer has transparency so they can fix their gender wage gap. Like, that's the real story. That, of course, doesn't get clicked, so that's not what they use as a headline. But that's the real story. They had recourse for that reason. So in the course of about 2 years of doing all of this research, I made almost a 180 turn on my own opinion of this, because I was like, I get it. It's uncomfortable. I get that. But what's more uncomfortable is sitting there wondering if you're getting discriminated against, or sitting there being frustrated because so-and-so is a slacker and he's overpaid, right? So now having recourse and having sort of that power, and surprisingly having an increase in morale because there's that sense of fairness and because there's that sense of, you know what you want to do, it's worth a little bit of discomfort in that regard.
So how does that work with hiring new people? One of the things I was ever once told by a CEO of my previous employer was, I want to have the liberty to pay someone X amount more than the salary house or whatever pay structure you put in place, because the company was growing to the point where they needed one, or so they thought. And the CEO wanted basically the right for exceptions. And another one is, at my current company, I was surprised to find the salary of one of my coworkers, and with the job titles and everything else that has been structured, the pay difference was such that I said, how does that work? How well did you negotiate your salary when you joined? He's left by now, so I'm not worried. But is it a help or a hindrance in hiring, and from whose point of view?
Yeah, so I would say it depends on how long-term your perspective is. So the manager that you brought up, the one that wants the freedom to have a lot of room to negotiate in order to get the best, he's playing the short game, right? And I get that. In a war for talent scenario, you want to bring in the most expensive people, so you want to be able to come to the table with the best bargaining chips so you can get that talent acquired. But talent that will come in because of the money will also leave because of the money.
Exactly.
So that's playing the short game. You're not playing the long game of how do we attract and retain talent over the long term, including possibly growing somebody into being as talented as that person we're trying to acquire. So it's a short game versus a long game thing. The other thing is that truthfully, at least here in the United States, a lot of places in the startup community view this sort of secrecy and the negotiating table as a shareholder value tactic, right? If I'm a really good negotiator and I'm a startup founder and I can get somebody sold out on my vision and they're going to come to work for me for 80 when they could be making 100 at Google, well, I just saved 20 grand a year in my capital. So my burn rate is lower and I'm creating more value for but again, very, very short-term mentality versus the long game of attracting and retaining talent. The interesting thing, again, is what's weird about this is there's a variety of different systems people can use, from tiering, which means every job is affixed to a certain tier and that comes with a pay range, to a formula, which is what Buffer does. There's a bunch of different systems you can use to have that uniformity and transparency. Almost all of them eliminate that negotiating piece in the salary, which in my opinion, I'm all for. Other than in a sales role or a marketing role, I don't really see a correlation between negotiating skills and job skills, right? Like, the fact that you're a good negotiator doesn't mean you're a great coder, right? So I'm all for eliminating that influence. The other thing is, it's just weird to me to celebrate the beginning of somebody's time with us with this really uncomfortable negotiation, right? One of the things I absolutely love and what I do for most of my job is as a writer and a speaker, I have a literary agent and a speaker bureau, both of whom's entire value to me is they do all the dirty work of negotiation, so I can just focus on making my client happy because we didn't have that weird, uncomfortable experience to begin our relationship. So there's a bunch of different reasons I'm in favor of it. And you're right, there are definitely going to be people that go, well, I don't even want to apply for your company because I can negotiate better at this company and I can get a higher salary. But that mentality is not going away. So 2 years from now, they're going to be more willing to jump ship because they negotiated better offer somewhere else. And I don't think it's worth it in the long term.
Who else has
As a horrible negotiator myself, I wish that the negotiation part would also go away. I'd be much more comfortable with the formula, and also because colleagues talk to each other. We're friends. I think that's what people forget, is that we're not just colleagues. We become friends at work. So
Right.
Of course we're going to tell each other what our salaries are. And once you found out that you've been screwed, well, then morale, I mean, it's toast.
Right. They're going to find out anyway. I mean, I live in the United States where employees discussing pay is actually protected by law. It's a very esoteric law that's very rarely enforced. And so a lot of companies still have rules against discussion. But the truth is, employees, not manager tier, but employee tiers across the United States is protected by a federal law. So they're going to talk, right? And then, like you said, the other thing is that negotiations piece. So there's some research that suggests that women and ethnic minorities are all attracted to companies with greater transparency. And one of the reasons for that is that it's one less thing they have to worry about, right? Because you're taking care of that. If there's no negotiation, then they don't have to worry. And if there's a uniform salary, then it's not in the back of their minds the way it is in some of these other companies. So, and then, I mean, there's a ton of research suggesting that if you move from a free-for-all negotiation or a salary range and you can negotiate inside that range system to a fixed formula or tiering system, you see a reduction in the gender wage gap. That one statistic was probably the reason that Ted picked up the talk. But you see a pretty dramatic reduction in that for that reason. But I think the more important reason is just that idea that the type of talent we all say we want in our organization is attracted to organizations with greater transparency because they have less to worry about in terms of being treated unfairly.
I just wanted to make a comment about the wage thing. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, I didn't even know you jumped on. I'm sorry.
That's
you were
okay.
in
Hi.
that little gallery thing. You were way off over here. My bad. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm sorry I joined in a little late. It's actually an odd thing to hear discussed because I have been government most of my life, and it's only the last 8 years that I haven't. So pay transparency is just a given. I mean, you can go online and see how much I made. If I tell
Right.
you, you look and you see what my pay scale was. So it just, it really was, it was kind of I don't want to say it was a struggle, but it's an odd thing to, when you apply for jobs, and do you ask for a certain salary, or do you, and like, we're very transparent in government. You put what your salaries were because you put what your pay grades were. And basically you're just looking for an evolution. Has this person been evolving in their grade? Like, I guess in the private industry, you'd be looking to see if certain positions, have they come into management and those kind of things. So it is a really strange discussion. And I never, ever even thought about it as it being an odd thing until you sit here and say that. That was the first comment, because I was thinking, well, geez, I have always, my peers, we've all known what we make. What we don't know is how we make what we make exactly, because you don't necessarily know how many years someone has been in the service, you know, whether the government, military, whatever. So that's what'll add, you know, to your pay scale. But once you know that, because you're friends and you chit chat, oh, I've been working, you know, for a number of years. Well, boom, now I've got my grade and I got my number of years. I go online, column, and I know exactly what you make. And there just is no issue. It's just never been an issue in the 9 to 13 years that I was in government service.
Well, is it 9 or is it 13? Because I want to know how much you get paid. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
If I go back, it'd have been 13, but that was kind of
it's interesting that you bring this up, Jane, because one of the things I'm a taiko drummer, and I am learning from Japanese taiko drummers, and I've been looking into the Japanese culture a bit. And one of the strangest things, and I'm wondering whether David has done any research into Japanese companies, because basically what I've heard is that in Japan, if you know somebody's university degree, you know how long he's been working. Doesn't matter which company, you know how much he gets paid.
So admittedly, I haven't. The thing that I think is interesting, Jane is actually my proof that this is cultural, right? The government sector is my proof that this is a cultural thing. It's not universal. And then the other proof is that there's a little bit of research that supports the idea that more collectivistic countries are more open to this idea than individualistic countries, right? So the United States, where I am, is probably the top most individualistic country in the world. I don't actually know if it is, but I wouldn't be surprised. All right. But as you shift to more collectivistic countries, which are largely a lot of Asian countries, some European countries, especially Scandinavian, as you get higher with that, it becomes less and less of a deal, right? And in fact, the biggest argument in the for-profit sector of why things should be private is an individualistic argument. It's, well, that's a private conversation between an employer and an employee, right? The only challenge is that affects everything else, right? If I work for an organization as one individual and there's a pay disparity that's essentially using resources that could be better used elsewhere, that's everybody's business, right? If we're overpaying to get that star marketing person so we can celebrate that we've got a celebrity chief marketing officer, we're wasting money in the company on that potentially, and that's everyone in the company's business, right? The other reason is whether or not you think it's a private arrangement between an employee and employer, and I totally get that argument because that's where I was too. Even if it is, it's irrelevant because the ability for employers to talk amongst themselves about salaries protected by law in the United States, again, it's covered under sort of that collective bargaining idea. And so therefore, the law sides with the idea that whether it's individual or not, it's still protected. And therefore, we're one notch closer to collectivistic than individualistic in that argument. So I don't have research on Japan in particular, but it wouldn't surprise me because of that shift we see towards collectivistic. And as Jane brought up, this idea that if you come from the government sector, I have a lot of friends that come from the military sector, et cetera, they're like, look, I don't care. That's also my proof, Jane, by the way, of maybe not at that front level, because I have some weird experiences with the DMV, but at higher levels of government, it's proof that if you pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table, they want to make a positive contribution to their organization, their society, et cetera. And that's a way more important conversation than what number is at the ending sequence of somebody's salary.
I would add one thing on the government side, however. We did have at different parts and times merit pay. So you still have I'm not at all going to say it's an ideal system for pay, but it's based on position, a very perhaps a little bit archaic system now that maybe needs to be revamped with modern times and new degrees and a lot more people who know how to code and things like that. But the system is applied virtually government-wide. Even if there's 2 or 3 different types of pay systems, the types of jobs that earn higher pay are the same, at least in the US government, no matter what government agency you're in. So it's very, very transparent, and everybody knows it. It's not odd if you come in and you're a clerk. And it doesn't mean that you're not hardworking. It doesn't mean that people who are, in administrative clerks aren't doing hard work. You know, though, that the pay scale and the pay grades for that position are going to be lower no matter what government agency you're in. So if you want to do better, then you're going to go for having the types of skills and degrees necessary to get a higher paying job, if that's what your motivation is. And then once you're in the position, if you're motivated by getting even more than you can, then you're going to try to do things to earn that little merit pay bonus at the end. But for the most part, I don't recall the majority of people in my former career government life thinking about those things. You were just more motivated to do a good job, to do the mission. Everything was mission oriented first. And then, yes, you had the drive of, I want to go up in the ranks. I want to become a manager. Most people who have a little ambition wanted that. But we were oriented.
Why do they have, sorry, I'm taking over. Never mind, we'll take this offline, Jane. I'm interested.
Well,
I'm interested why because they may just want a management position because that was the only way to get more money in those systems.
No, I don't think that's true. So I think
okay.
when there's a path, people want to travel the path. They want to show progress. The problem is that in a lot of organizations, the only path is up, right? So I've seen a lot of organizations have success with the idea that there's a path to travel even if you want to stay in the same role. So it's a very weird company to pull out, but I cut my teeth. The very first job I had at school was in the pharmaceutical industry. I was a sales rep. And one of the things I still admire about pharma, there's a lot not to admire, mind you, was that they understood that if they promoted a good salesperson into management, then they lost a good salesperson and they gained a bad manager. So what they actually did was they had a sales representative, senior sales director. They had like this series of progressions that it would take 15 years to move through, just like it would take 15 years to move up through an organization. But as you did, you started to get equivalent perks to those managers. You got a little bit better company car, you got pay raise, you got whatever. But the biggest thing was just having that path. I think humans in general are motivated. Pay is a big motivator, but a bigger one is just progress and the ability to look forward and see that I made progress. And if you don't map that out for every role, then the default way to progress is to go up through management. I think that's why James said that if you have some talent, you want to be into management. In most of what I see in government is that the only path is up. And so you're going to take it.
Yeah, most software development companies even, because it's interesting that you mentioned the path for marketing and sales. Because the first company I worked for, Volmac, taken over by Capgemini, by the way, or merged. Then Jane knows what I'm talking about. They actually had a system where programmers could stay programmers, and there wasn't a cap on their salary, and you still had a progression through functions and what have you. The only thing is that when Volmac and Capgemini merged, they got rid of that. And we went back to that. Yeah, it was a pity. The French influence got us the management path only. But
I just want to jump in, David, just because I want to be conscious of your time. How because we said 45 minutes, we started late, but I know you are super busy, so I just wanted to see.
Yeah, no, I'm okay. We were going a little bit over, and Jane, I know you had something you wanted to chime in on, and then maybe we can give final thoughts.
Like 5 more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
The one comment was when you said having that drive to want to go up. Another thing for government or anywhere, I think, is it tends to be, it shouldn't be that way. And I think we're going to different models, and I'm looking forward to that, even though hopefully my years will be winding down for work one day, is that you want to make an impact. And a lot of times in government, at least, the only way you can make a bigger impact, depending on your role, is to have rank, is to have a higher grade. And that's when you can be a decision player. And this is the same thing in other kinds of jobs in the private industry. I'm in the private industry now 8 years. In my particular company where I am now, if I'm not middle executive management, you're not listened to. It doesn't matter your experience. It doesn't matter what you say may be good. The methods you may be giving are worth listening to, and that's sad, but that's the truth. So that's another reason to want to go upward, is to
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but imagine a system where even the people that are on the front lines can move forward, and we treat someone who's been in that frontline role for 10 years and has increased in skills, we treat their voice as valuable as that one that was just, I don't know. I mean, there's weird correlations between people who strive to be at the top levels of organization and narcissism, right? So imagine treating that voice that's down here and chose to stay here as much as the narcissist voice. So we might actually have a way better organization.
I'm pretty sure we would.
All right, should we get to Lisette's last question? I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
No, wait, Christian had a question before mine.
Okay, yeah, I just got to jump in. You mentioned before, put customer second. It reminded me of a statement from Richard Branson, which I'm also applying. I put employee first. Richard Branson say, treat the employee. The way you treat your employee is the way they're going to treat your customer. Mm-hmm. And I love that because I prefer to treat my employee well than I have a magnitude of 10 who's going to treat the customer better.
Yeah.
So I just want to correlate and ask you, does it go in that direction, what you write in your book? Will you say some word about it?
Yeah, it basically does. So the book, that chapter starts with Vinette Nair, HLC Technologies, who was one of Richard Branson's influences in that. We also look at Danny Meyer of Union Square Hospitality. They're probably most notable now for Shake Shack, but they created a bunch of other restaurants. And they really were that. They believed if we take care of our employees will take care of our customer, right? But what's interesting to me is that the maxim is different. The maxim is usually, the customer's always right, which I understand the sentiment, but it sends a subtle suggestion. I mean, customers are smart. They know. I mean, how many times have you gotten on the phone with a call center thing and the first thing you do is ask for a manager, ask for somebody higher? Why? Because they can solve my problem more than this frontline person is. That's an organizational issue, right? Because truthfully, my approach as a manager should be, I am giving my employees what they need to solve my customers' problems. And they shouldn't need to come to me because my employees should already be empowered enough to solve that problem. I get that there are exceptions to that rule, but that's the idea. My employees shouldn't fear that I'm going to throw them under the bus and change the whole game to make one customer satisfied. They should feel that I'm going to support whatever decision they make on behalf of the customer, and then they can go serve that customer to their full potential. And that's what I think Branson is getting at. That's what Danny Meyer believes. We look at Howard Schultz and Starbucks, and then Vinette Nair, from whom the term employees first, customer second comes from.
And when you discuss this topic with companies, what are the reactions?
People on the sales and customer service side get it. Very few others do. And the reason is that in most larger organizations, finance and accounting, the people who everyone is accountable to for spending the company's money, they're used to being in that power seat, right? And the idea that their role is a support role, not the role that people are accountable to, that takes a lot of shifting. And it is possible. But again, I think the side that's in that front line with the customer, they get it because they're already in the value zone. The issues are to what we should be looking at as support functions who have unfortunately gained probably far too much power over the last 50 years than they should.
And do you see any direction going toward a shifting, or do you think we have a status quo?
Yeah, no, I definitely see it as a trend. Every success story, it's like a snowball. It begets a new success story. And the more that CEOs like Richard Branson and Danny Meyer are very public about it, we start to see that role. I'm encouraged on the research side by a trend towards servant leadership and authentic leadership and these models of leadership that are more employee focused. That said, we've spent the better part of the last 10,000 years being used to the idea that everyone's accountable to one king or queen type person. So I'm not yet optimistic about the timeline it'll take to reverse all of these things, but I definitely do see a trend.
That's cool. That's a good news. So basically, we have to be patient, and we have to turn up the goods by broadcasting more what works.
Yeah, and I should say that the interesting thing is that these ideas are also strategies for winning the war for talent. So while I say, I'm not naive, I don't think we're going to reverse this trend in 10 years if it took hundreds of years to get to. It will reverse fastest in the areas where competition for talent is the fiercest, right? And so if you're in that role, then it might actually reverse in 10 years, right? If you're not, it might take a little longer, right? But it's kind of weird to say, like the types of jobs that might never change are also the ones that robots are going to be doing soon anyway, right? So we've got that going for us.
Great, thanks.
Just one quick question on this thing. David, have you seen in your research any correlation between companies that have very explicit goals and values and servant leadership, putting the employees first and the customer second?
Yeah, so I can't answer that actually. And the reason why is exciting. So I'm in the midst of helping out on a research project to answer sort of that exact question. So it's not my research project, which is why I don't want to answer it. I'm one of the fun things I get to do is supervise other people's PhD research. And I am working with someone who's working on that issue, and I don't want to reveal their stuff.
No, of course not. But do give us a heads up when it gets published, because I'd be interested.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly plan, when the research actually gets published in an academic journal, I certainly plan on using my skills to shout it from the rooftops of the practitioner media and that sort of stuff. So we definitely plan on that. I don't want to undercut his big reveal, if
completely understood.
However, the mere fact that someone's thinking to do that research shows that because most research follows like an inkling of, I think this is the case, so now I'm going to do the research to prove it. So the mere fact that there are people thinking to research this is also suggestive of trend shifts and that sort of stuff. So I can say that.
All right, Lisette, give us your last question, which is a great one.
I just put it in the chat. I wasn't sure if we'd get to it, but I just wanted it to be out there. But my question is, I know that the process of writing the book is you learn a lot when you write a book. And so I wanted to know, like, now that it's been a year and you've had time to sort of, assemble the information, what was one of the biggest or some of the biggest things that you learned personally from the book, or things that surprised you?
Yeah. So, I already sort of hinted at the idea that the biggest change of the different practices I made was the one around transparency. So that was the big one. The biggest mindset shift happened after the book was published. And I already sort of hinted at this in one answer, but it was that idea that when I started this, I thought I was keeping track of changes that were being implemented. And what I realized after the fact was that I was actually keeping track of like other stuff that was weighing people down and being removed. So like I said earlier, these are practices of elimination. We have this big bureaucratic policy. We realized it was getting in people's way, so we eliminated it. We replaced it with this other thing. And I think there's really something to that. My first book was in a totally different category. It was around creativity and innovation. And you get a very similar question there, which is, can you teach people to be creative? And my answer was always no, because kids are the most creative people in the world. What you can do is strip away all that crap that people who were trying to teach them taught them inadvertently and get them back to that mentality of that creative person. And I think it's the case here too, right? I think that in knowledge work, in creative work, and people who are tasked with solving problems, people want to actually be about the mission of the organization, want to create value for customers, want to do those things. And the best thing you can do as a leader isn't to implement some new thing. It's to figure out what's holding your people back and remove it. And I didn't really see that in the book until after it was published and other people were sharing me their reactions. And I have to say, I love that as the big idea and the big insight more than any idea or insight I had while I was writing.
Awesome. That's really interesting.
I love that. I really do, because one of the things I'm doing in meditation and learning is that acceptance isn't something you do actively. It's letting go of resistance.
What are you doing? Sorry.
It's like a dirty
Oh,
Hello.
my dad.
He was sticking
Hi.
his fingers underneath the door, probably telling me it was time for lunch or something, right?
Yeah, no, listen,
Package.
Oh, I have a package.
we should let you go. You've been on way too much time. Hi.
Maybe after.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting more about these ideas, but also sharing the new secret project pretty soon with Happy Melly folks too.
When should we expect that, more or less?
March of 2018 is the launch date we're looking for now. So yeah.
March 2018.
All
Yep.
right. It's in the calendar.
All right.
Thanks so much, David. And we'll send you the
Thank
report.
you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.
Daddy.
Bye-bye.